nga mugawas kag balay mag-ulan, okay? So it could be a pattern, okay? However, we could not establish a cause or cause and effect relationship. So dili na to ma-determine kung unsay reason nga nung inana ang nahitabo. Or for example, every time nga mag-ulan, mutaas ang ang halin sa lapis. So posible na nga imong ma-observe na to nga naay inana nga kuan, relationship. Okay? So however, it needs investigation further kung nabagi relation ang duha ka variable. They may have a correlation but we have to find out the cause and effect of this variable. Okay, kung walay cause and effect or we cannot explain the reason behind the correlation, then we cannot use the, let's say, the x variable as a predictor of the other variable. So let's say every rainy season kamay ra og halin taas ang halin sa lapis. If we could not establish that the relation, dili tam pwede mo ingon nga karon ulan siguro gamay ra halin ang atong lapis karon. Okay? So we cannot say that unless we can find a conclusive evidence that those two variables exist. So just like the price and the quantity demand. So makuan man gyud nato the reason behind nya nung every time we increase the price, the quantity demand decreases. So kana we can establish the cause and effect because of course limited ang money sa tao, limited ang money. So therefore, kung mutaas ang price sa let's say sa kaninga product, okay? So let's say price sa lapis. So kung mutaas ang price, gamay ray mapalit sa income sa tao. Okay? So or kung mo decrease ang price sa lapis, dagay mo palit kay ni barato or mas dagay mapalit ang ilang income. Okay, so this morning we're going to continue the discussion. Okay, so we will begin with the coastal forecasting. Okay, now there are factors or variables nga dili lang isa ka variable ang naay effect, okay? Or naay cause para ana nga variable. Let's say quantity demand for the let's say iPhone, okay? So when we consider buying iPhone, so daghan ta og mga factors or mga uh, kumbaga we call that mga kanang mga deciding factors, okay? So some of us importante ang price. Some of us siguro mas palabihon ang quality, okay? Others siguro kay gamit sa ilang business or mas efficient ang ilang trabaho because of the Apple, okay? So in linear regression analysis, we only observe or we only study one variable or effect of that one variable to the dependent variable. However, in reality, um, the variables may be more than one. Okay, so so the linear regression analysis is not enough to understand the the factors causing the effect of the y variable. So causal forecasting. So causal forecasting methods are used when the value being forecast is affected by some other value. So just like in a linear regression analysis, there is a correlation, but correlation does not mean causation. So we have to establish the connection between the two variables. So the cause and effect relationship can be identified between the two values, and if the relationship is a linear, so if maka-establish na sa cause and effect, then we can use the projection of the other value using the independent variable. So let's say we already established the cause and effect of the price to the quantity demand of the product. So we can now say that the price, kumu sa kataog price, there is an effect to the quantity demand. So another example is if we observe the advertising expenditures to the sales. So tapos nakita sa correlation nga they are directly related. Okay? So we can therefore say that every time we increase our advertising expense, or if every time we promote our products or services, therefore we can say that it can increase the sales. So the level of advertising can be used as a predictor of the sales. So in causal forecasting, correlation is not enough. So you have to find the cause and effect. So as I mentioned, Gaina, there is the linear regression only studies one independent variable to the dependent variable. But in reality, it could the dependent variable could be the result of so many independent variable. So let's say katong demand sa product. Posible yan ang adili lang price ang iyang factor or variable. It could also include the quality, the usage or the importance of that product to the work of the person buying it. Or it could be the advertising. So the more you promote the product, the more nga mo increase iyang demand. So in attempt to understand so many factors to the dependent variable, so dili na enough ang linear regression. So we will use the multiple regression analysis. So this is the graph for the multiple regression. So kung ang linear regression is only two-dimensional, the multiple regression will have a three-dimensional nga graph because there are already more than two variables. So there is only one dependent variable. However, it has two or more x variables or independent variables. So get the formula for the multiple regression. So if you recall in getting the slope or the linear in the linear regression, so we have a plus b, a plus b multiplied by x. So a is the constant coefficient. Okay, b is the slope or the variable cost per unit multiplied by the quantity or x. But since this is multiple regression, so there are several um, variables. So y hat, so it is the dependent variable. So let's say this is the demand or quantity demand. So a sub zero is the constant coefficient. So it is the y-intercept when it is the value of y when x that the other variables are uh, zero ang iyang quantity. So a1 and a2 are the variable coefficients. So maglaylay siya depende sa quantity. So it's actually the slope. Okay? So kung there are too many, are there more than one variable, so there could be many slopes. So x1 is the one of the independent variable. So let's say this is the price. And the other variable, x2, the other independent variable, let's say this is quality. So we are in multiple regression, we're studying the impact of two variables to the dependent variable, which is the quantity demand. So what are the benefits of using those regression analysis? So regression analysis is a quantitative method. So as we know, basta mogamit na tag numbers, um, it becomes a common language. So it becomes more objective. So maski asa pa nga tao imo na ipakita nga numbers, it's not easy to refute. Okay? So a given data set generates specific results. So the results can be used to draw conclusions and make forecasts. Second, regression analysis is an important tool for budgeting and cost accounting. So um, when we do our budgeting, okay, so we forecast, di ba? So we can come up with a more accurate forecast if we use the linear regression analysis. So in budgeting, it can also a way to separate the fixed cost and the variable cost. Okay. So the use of regression analysis for computing fixed and variable portion of mixed cost will be covered later. So di ba there are cost nga na component nga fixed cost and variable. So for example sa mga electricity o let's say water bill. So ang water bill nakadepende na siya sa atong usage. However, maski pag di ka magamit og tubig, nagyapon kay bayaran. So kanang cost nga mo appear sa atong bill, maski wa ka nagamit og tubig, that's actually the fixed cost. Okay? So regardless of the usage, you will pay that, and then the increasing amount. So after that, we call that the variable portion, or nakadepende na siya sa ato ang paggamit. So the regression analysis can help us separate the fixed cost and the variable cost. So if you can recall in your cost accounting, di ba natay uh, high-low method, scatter graph, and last is the linear regression. So the usage of those method is to separate the fixed cost and the variable cost. However, the regression analysis is not without limitations. So first limitation, the regression analysis uses historical data. So of course, kung wala historical data, you cannot perform the regression analysis. So second limitation, even if the historical data is available, okay, so for example, mga past nga sales. So its use is questionable for predicting the future if there is a significant change has taken place in the conditions surrounding that information. So for example, in 2019, so you are naghimo ka og forecast for let's say 2020 karon, 2020 ta karon, and then naghimo kag sales forecast for the next 5 years, so 2021 to 2025. So you use the regression analysis or use the linear regression. So ang imong data karon is for the past 5 years, so na kay 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now, we know that in 2020 there's a significant change, di ba? So 2020 is not really a ordinary year because there is a significant event. So if we use 2020 as a part of our data, okay, in performing the regression analysis, our forecast may be let's say inaccurate, okay, because 2020 is an outlier. So when say outlier, this is not an ordinary, okay. So if we use the sales in 2020, it could impact our forecast for the next 5 years. So most likely, understated ang atong sales forecast for the next 5 years. So in causal forecasting, the usefulness of data generated by regression analysis depends on the choice of independent variables. So the usefulness nakadepende na unsa ato ang gi-studyhan niya variable. So if the choice of the independent variable is dili mao or inappropriate, the results can be misleading. So that is why 'di ba sa thesis nato, before we do the the survey or the questionnaire or to gather data, 'di ba? Magbasa sa ta sa review of related literature. So the purpose of that is to understand further the relationship of the variable nga atong gistudyhan. So what are the variables that could possibly affect the independent variable, and what are the usual results from the previous study? And then we will also be able to find out kung asa man gyud ang independent variable or asa ang dependent variable. Because kung dili mao, then the results of the study could be misleading and it cannot be used as a predictor. Statistical relationships can be developed using the regression analysis and are valid only for the range of data in the sample. So of course, our scientists today, so especially when they try to forecast the possible number of cases in the future, so naka-anchor na siya sa mga past nga data or sa range of data. However, if there is an outlier, dili na siya nila i-include. So mailhan man nato ng outlier kay very layo na gyud siya sa line. So it's either very low or very high. Okay, so we're done with the linear regression. So another tool in forecasting is called the learning curve. So I hope you are already familiar with that. So how to use the learning curve in the forecasting? So actually, the learning curve is about the increased efficiency of the person with a given task. So, 'di ba, remember when you are trying to when your parents taught you the household chores, 'di ba? Hugas plato, maglaba. So, let's say maghugas kag plato. So, sugod pa lang ana, medyo hinay pa or gamay pa imong mahugasan because you're still starting. Okay? Or every time nga mo pa pagsugod nimo og laba, medyo hinay pa ang imong paglaba because you are still learning. However, as time goes by and then kung sige na nimo buhaton, sige ka hugas plato, sige ka og laba, you will observe that your efficiency increased. Okay? Because your mastery of the task also increased. So, mo na pasabot sa learning curve nga ang employee, kung especially kung magbalik-balik iyang trabaho, it will expected niya mo increase ang iyang efficiency. So we call that the learning curve. So the efficiency increase as the amount of experience a person has with a given task increases. So the time required for performing the task decreases. So kung sa una kung maghugas kag plato, let's say 30 minutes, so sa sige ni mo hugas, probably may mo na lang na siya og 15 minutes, okay? Or less than 30 minutes. So there are two learning curve models that are commonly used. So however, we will only tackle the first. So it's the cumulative average time learning model. Kay mo man ni ang pinaka gamit. Okay. Okay. So the other one is called the incremental unit time learning model. So the amount of the learning curve is expressed in a percentage. So ranging from more than 51% but less than 100%. So the percentage refers to the amount of time required required as a percentage of the time required. To the mo na lang na ang time nga imong gamiton to finish the task. Okay? So 100%, ang pasabot sa 100%, walay learning curve nga nahitabo. Okay? Or walay learning nga nahitabo, walay ni increase nga efficiency. So let's say for that particular task, moabot og 10 hours na siya. So kung wala na increase imong efficiency, the next time you do that, it is still 10 hours. Okay? So 100% indicates no learning. So the lower the percentage is, the greater is the amount of learning that is taking place. So magkaubos ang learning curve percentage, the higher the learning. However, there are limitations in the learning curve. So dili siya pwede 100% because it indicates no learning, and dili po siya pwede nga lesser than 50% or 50% because it will give us uh, dili na mao nga results or misleading results. So the learning curve has a range between 51% to 99%. So cumulative average time learning. So if the learning curve is 70%, so every time that the total number of units produced doubles, so every time daw kuno nga mo double ang product or units nga mahuman, the estimated cumulative total production time for all units produced decreases to 70%. So let us say for 1 hour makahugas kag plato nga 30 ka buok. Okay? So for another 30 ka plates, so 60 tanan, dili na siya 2 hours because it will be reduced by 70%. So so 70% times 60 minutes, so it will only take about 42 minutes to finish the entire 1 hour and 42 minutes. No, 42 times 42. So that's the number of units nga mahuman nimo ang 60 ka plates. So it will so 1 hour and 40 minutes. So what are the so in using the cumulative average time, what are the specific things nga we can calculate? So one is the average time per unit. So the average time to finish the unit, the total time to produce, and lastly is the total production time required for a certain blocks of units. So namanggoy especially sa manufacturing, 'di ba? It's by batch. It's not per unit ang pag-produce. So magdungan-dungan na sila og kahuman. So there are two methods. First method is calculating the estimated total time required for production, then use the estimated total time to calculate the average time per unit. So una nimo makuha ang total time, ayha ang estimated average time. So this is the formula to get the total time. So time required for the first unit. So how many hours nimo or unsay time nimo mahuman ang first nga unit, or the unit could mean a product or one service task times 2 multiplied by the learning curve. Dili na siya percentage, it should be expressed in a decimal format, then raised to n, or the number of doublings, or kapila siya mag-double. So once the total time is known, so we can now calculate the average time per unit. So by dividing the total time by the number of units produced. So let's have an example. So a plant that manufactures cars is subject to an 80% learning curve. So you need 10 hours to produce the first car. So according to the cumulative average time, the estimated total time required to manufacture the first two cars uh, will be 80% of the total time it would have taken place to produce two cars if no learning had taken place. If no learning had taken place, then estimated production time for the first two cars would be 20 hours. So of course, kung 100% ang learning curve, no learning, so kung 10 hours ang kada isa ka car, then in producing the two cars, you need 20 hours. But because there is an 80% learning curve, so instead of 20 hours ang imong ma ma-consume, 16 hours na lang sa duha ka cars. Okay? So 16 hours. So yun sa pag-compute ang 16, so 10 hours times 2 times 0.80 raised to 1 because mo pa niya first nga double. So the total production time is 16 hours. Therefore, the average time to produce each unit or two cars is 8 hours each. So 16 divided by 2. So the first doubling to produce the two units. So total time niya is 16 hours. And then average time is 8 hours per car. Now the second doubling, so 2 times 2 is 4 units. So total time required to produce 4 cars. So you have 10 times 2 times 0.80 raised to 2. Kaduha naman siya nag-double. So the result is 25.6 hours. So which means nga sa upat ka units, sa upat ka cars, it will take only 25.6 hours to finish. So average time is now 6.4 hours. So if you notice, the average time keep decreases each time we double the production. So method 2 is unahon og compute ang average time ay ang total time. So formula is time required for the first unit times a learning curve raised to n, or the number of doublings. Once the estimated cumulative average time is known, then we can now get the total time by multiplying the average time by the number of units produced. Okay, so example. So same gihapon, same problem, 80% learning curve. Then the first car is 10 hours to produce. So using the formula, so 10 hours times 0.80 raised to 1. So first doubling. So the first unit, the average time is 8 hours. So the total time to produce two cars is 16 hours. So 8 times 2 is 16. So second doubling, so you have 6.4 hours average time times 4 units, 25.6 hours. Third doubling, or 8, so raised to 3, 5.12 hours. So the total hours required to produce 8 cars is 40.96 hours. So mara na ang formula. So each time you double. So this is the table. So 80% learning curve with 100% no learning, it will take about 20 hours to produce two cars. So therefore, each car will take 10 hours to produce. So for the first unit, 10 hours. So average time per unit is 10. The second unit, it will only add 6 hours. So total hours to produce is 16. So the average time is now 8 hours per car. Okay, so on. So what are the benefits of using the learning curves? So learning curves should be used in the development of production and labor budgets when changes such as new products are planned. So in budgeting, so mas maka-forecast ta og tarong sa the number of units that we produce. Second, recognizing that higher costs will occur in the early phase of the product life cycle allows more effective evaluation of managers. Third, labor costs should be adjusted regularly in recognition that learning causes standard costs to decrease over time. So it has an impact to the standard cost. So our standard cost may uh, okay, so the standard cost per unit or per hour, so pwede na siya ma-revise. Life cycle costing and bidding. So in calculation of the cost of contract, the learning curve analysis can ensure that the cost estimates are accurate over the life of the contract. So it leading to a better competitive bidding on projects. So gamit po siya sa uh, in computing for the bidding cost. In our cost volume profit analysis, so if the learning is not considered in determining the break-even point, so kung wala siya na-appeal, so it could result into an overstatement of the number of units to break even. So capital budgeting, so cost can be projected more accurately over the life of the capital investment when there is an expectation of a movement in the labor productivity. Sa make or buy decision, the analysis of the cost to make the product will be affected by the learning curve in effect. Then you have the limitations. So the first limitation of the learning curve, so it is appropriate only for labor-intensive operations involving repetitive tasks. So take note, labor-intensive and the tasks are repetitive. So we cannot use the learning curve if the task of the employee is not repetitive. And they are not, kumbaga, ang gamit nila is manual, not with the help of the machines. Okay, so especially mga manufacturing karon, so if they rely heavily on their machines, unless na ang dependent sa mga employees, so the learning curve analysis cannot be used. Second limitation of the learning curve, so the learning rate is assumed to be constant. So the learning rate nga gi-expressed as a percentage, it is assumed to be constant. But in reality, there might be a decline in the learning curve. So perhaps at the start, 70%, tapos later on mo, abot na lang siya og 80%. And the next number of units would be only be 95%. So so that's the limitation because in reality the learning rate is not constant. A third limitation of the learning curve, so an observed change in productivity might actually be associated with factors other than learning. So the cause of the learning might not be because of the repetition of tasks, but perhaps because of the change in the labor mix. Okay, so more employees and more competence. Probably it's the product mix or there's a change in the raw materials nga mas makapa-efficient or mas makapa-dali og produce sa product and other factors. So if there are factors other than learning affecting the productivity, then the learning model developed using the historical data will produce the inaccurate estimates of labor time and cost. So if there are other factors nga nung na-increase ang efficiency, ay it's not because of the learning. So it can produce the historical data nga gigamit can produce inaccurate estimates of labor time and cost. Okay, so let's have a sample question. So Reeves Incorporated has developed a new production process to manufacture the product. So the new process is complex and requires a high degree of technical skill. However, management believes there is a good opportunity for the employees to improve as they become more familiar with the production process. The production of the first unit requires 100 direct labor hours. If 70% of the learning curve is used, what is the cumulative direct labor hours required to produce a total of 8 units? Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes. 2 minutes lang. 2 minutes and then type your answers in the chat box. So is it letter A, 196 hours, B, 274 hours, C, 392 hours, and D, 560 hours? Okay, so everyone is required to give their answers. Okay, type your answers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the answer for this question is actually letter B, 274 hours. So again, sa pagkuha ang 274 hours, so 1 unit will need 100 hours. So 8 units is a third doubling. So ikatulo nag-double. Diba the first double is 2, the second double is 4. So 8 units is uh, the third doubling. So 70% learning curve. So 0.70 raised to 3. So you have 34.3 hours per unit, multiplied it by 8 units. So you have 274. So exactly 274.4 hours. So rounding it off to the whole number, so you have 274 hours. So those who only give their answers, so Reloisa and J. Marie, so you have uh, a bonus of 5 points in the midterm exam. The rest, wala. So kindly kuan me. So ipa-inom daw sa ako during the midterm exam. Okay, so okay, so that's all for today. So see you in our next lecture video next week. So thank you for listening.